Let me tell you a story about something that happened to me recently. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't believe unless it happened to you. I live in a neighborhood called Willow Creek, which sounds peaceful and charming. And honestly, it is most of the time. The houses are nice, the lawns are green, and everyone seems friendly enough. But there's one thing about this place that makes life interesting. That thing is the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. And let me tell you, they take their rules very seriously. One Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen table working on my laptop. My coffee was steaming next to me, and everything felt calm and normal. Suddenly, a loud noise shattered the quiet. It wasn't just any noise. It was my garage alarm system going off. You see, after a few break-ins happened in our area last year, I decided to install some high-tech security equipment in my garage. These alarms aren't your average ones. They're super sensitive, with flashing lights and sirens loud enough to wake up the whole block. I jumped out of my chair, heart racing. Who could be triggering the alarm? Was someone trying to break in? I grabbed the baseball bat Mark keeps by the door, just in case, and headed toward the garage. As I peeked inside, I couldn't believe what I saw. Standing there, wide-eyed and frozen like a deer caught in headlights, was Karen Thompson. Yes, *that Karen. The one who thinks she runs the HOA and spends her days making sure everyone follows every single rule, no matter how small. "What are you doing in my garage?" I asked, trying to stay calm, but failing miserably. My voice came out louder than I intended, probably because I was still processing the shock of finding her there. Karen blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting to get caught. I needed to inspect it," she stammered, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline. "For compliance." "Compliance? Are you kidding me?" She broke into my garage, a private part of my home, because she wanted to check if it met the HOA standards. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she really think that was okay? I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Here I was, minding my own business, and this woman had invaded my space without even asking. What gave her the right? I didn't care how many rules were in the HOA handbook. Nothing justified barging into someone's property uninvited. Karen tried to explain herself, mumbling something about how the garage door is visible from the street and therefore part of the exterior aesthetic. But her excuses only made me angrier. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about respect. Respect for boundaries, for privacy, for basic human decency. After a long pause, I finally found my words. "You can't just walk into people's homes whenever you feel like it," I said firmly. "This isn't okay." Karen looked flustered, shifting uncomfortably under my glare. For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback or a condescending remark. She knew she'd crossed a line, and deep down, I think she realized it too. Still, as much as I wanted to scream or throw something, I forced myself to stay composed. Losing my temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only give her more ammunition to use against me later. Instead, I told her to leave immediately and warned her not to come back without permission. Then I locked the garage door behind her, breathing deeply to steady my nerves. As I stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been standing moments earlier, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After Karen's unexpected visit to my garage, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. It wasn't just about her walking in without permission. It was the arrogance behind it. She acted like she had every right to barge into my private space, as if my home wasn't really mine but some extension of the HOA's domain. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How could someone think they were above basic respect and decency? I decided I needed answers. The next day, I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board. When I arrived at the community center, I could feel the tension in the air. Patricia Langston, the president of the HOA, greeted me with her usual polished smile, though something about it felt forced. "We're so glad you're here," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Let's discuss your concerns." Once everyone settled, I laid out what happened. I described how Karen had entered my garage without notice, triggering the alarms I'd installed for safety. I made it clear that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a breach of privacy. To my surprise, the board members exchanged uneasy glances. They claimed they hadn't authorized Karen to inspect my property. "We don't condone unauthorized entries," Patricia said smoothly, though her fingers tapped nervously on the table. "If Karen overstepped, we'll address it." But Karen wasn't backing down. She sat across from me, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. "Your garage door is visible from the street," she insisted, her tone sharp. "It's part of the exterior aesthetic. If it doesn't meet standards, we have every right to check." I stared at her, incredulous. Did she actually believe that nonsense? Just because my garage was visible didn't mean she could treat it like public property. "Visible or not, it's still part of my home," I shot back. "You can't just walk in whenever you want. That's trespassing." Karen's face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she doubled down. "The HOA exists to maintain property values," she said, as if reciting from a script. "If homeowners don't follow the guidelines, it affects everyone." Her words hit a nerve. Sure, maintaining standards is important, but where do you draw the line? When does enforcing rules become controlling people's lives? I wanted to scream, to tell her she was out of control, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't help. I needed to fight smart, not emotionally. That's when I realized I had leverage. The alarms in my garage weren't just loud, they recorded motion. Every time they went off, they captured footage of whatever triggered them. And guess what? Karen's little inspection trip was caught on camera. I hadn't checked the footage yet, but I knew it would prove she'd been snooping around without permission. "So let's talk about compliance," I said, leaning forward slightly. My voice was steady now, carrying an edge of confidence. "According to the HOA bylaws, inspections require prior written notice and homeowner consent. Did you provide either of those before entering my garage?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She glanced at Patricia, who avoided eye contact altogether. For the first time, I saw a crack in Karen's armor. She might be pushy and relentless, but she wasn't invincible, and I was done letting her intimidate me. After the meeting ended, I went straight home and reviewed the security footage. There she was, clear as day, sneaking around my driveway and peering into my garage. The evidence was undeniable. Armed with the video, I filed a formal complaint against Karen, not just for trespassing, but for creating a hostile environment within the community. I also reached out to my neighbors, sharing my story and asking if anyone else had experienced similar issues. To my relief, I wasn't alone. Several families confessed they'd dealt with Karen's invasive behavior too. One couple told me she'd shown up unannounced to measure their hedges, claiming they were too tall. Another neighbor admitted she'd received a fine for leaving her recycling bin out overnight, something Karen apparently deemed unacceptable. With each news story, my resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought she was untouchable. Karen had spent years throwing her weight around, intimidating people into submission. But no one had ever challenged her before. Until now. As I prepared for the next phase of this battle, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Taking on the HOA and Karen wasn't going to be easy. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, you have to fight for your rights, even if it means facing someone who refuses to play fair. Once I realized Karen wasn't alone in her behavior, I knew this fight was bigger than just me. It wasn't about one person breaking into my garage. It was about a pattern of overreach and control that had been going on for years. And if I wanted to make a real difference, I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. I started talking to more neighbors, sharing my experience, and asking if they'd ever felt pressured or harassed by the HOA. At first, people were hesitant. Some worried about retaliation, Others didn't want to cause trouble. But as I kept reaching out, the stories began pouring in. One family told me how Karen had shown up at their house late on a Friday evening, claiming their porch light was too bright and demanding they change it immediately. Another neighbor said she'd been fined repeatedly for planting flowers in her front yard because they weren't on the HOA's approved list of colors. The more I listened, the angrier I got, not just for myself, but for all of us. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were constant reminders that we didn't truly own our homes. Every decision, no matter how small, seemed to require permission from someone else. It was exhausting, suffocating even. Sarah, who'd become a close friend since moving here last year, was especially supportive. She helped me organize a petition calling for accountability within the HOA. Together, we drafted a letter outlining specific grievances: the lack of transparency, the invasive inspections, the arbitrary fines. We asked residents to sign it if they agreed something needed to change. To our surprise, the response was overwhelming. Within days, dozens of signatures poured in. Even some of the quieter neighbors, people I'd never seen speak up before, were eager to add their names. Of course, Karen didn't take this lying down. When she caught wind of the petition, she flipped. At the next HOA meeting, she accused me of stirring up drama and spreading lies. Her voice shook with barely contained rage as she ranted about how I was undermining the association's authority. "This neighborhood deserves order," she shouted, slamming her fist on the table. The room fell silent, everyone staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Patricia tried to intervene, attempting to smooth things over with her usual charm. "Let's focus on finding solutions," she said diplomatically, though her nervous smile betrayed her discomfort. But Karen wasn't having it. She glared at me, her eyes blazing with defiance. For a moment, I wondered if she might actually lunge across the table. Instead, she stormed out, muttering under her breath. After she left, the atmosphere shifted. People started speaking up, sharing their frustrations in ways they hadn't before. A young couple admitted they'd considered moving because of the pressure to conform. An older man confessed he'd stopped attending social events because he felt judged for his unkempt lawn. Slowly, the walls of fear began to crumble. That night, as I drove home, I replayed the meeting in my head. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could push back against the suffocating grip of the HOA. Maybe we could reclaim our neighborhood, not as a place ruled by rules, but as a community where people felt valued and respected. But hope isn't enough. I knew Karen wouldn't give up without a fight. She'd double down, dig in her heels, and try to discredit anyone who opposed her. And honestly, I was ready for it, because this wasn't just about standing up to one person anymore. It was about proving that we, the homeowners, had a voice too, and we deserved to be heard. With Karen's behavior escalating and the petition gaining momentum, I knew I had to stay one step ahead. She wasn't going to back down quietly, and neither was I. So I decided to set a trap, one that would expose her actions once and for all. The idea came to me late one night as I scrolled through my phone, reviewing the security footage from my garage. Watching Karen snoop around my driveway made me realize something. She wasn't just inspecting properties when invited or during official visits. No, she was prowling around whenever she felt like it, treating the neighborhood like her personal domain. If I could catch her in the act again, this time on camera, it would be undeniable proof of her overreach. I upgraded my security system, adding motion-activated cameras not just in the garage, but also along the side of the house and near the driveway. These weren't visible unless you were looking closely, but they covered every angle. I also downloaded an app that sent instant alerts to my phone whenever movement triggered the cameras. It was a small investment, but it gave me peace of mind and a way to protect myself. For weeks, nothing happened. Life went on as usual. Work emails, grocery runs, quiet evenings on the couch with Mark. But I stayed vigilant, keeping an eye on the app notifications. Then, one evening, it happened. My phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected at front driveway. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m., long after most people had settled in for the night. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. There she was, Karen, creeping around my driveway with her clipboard in hand. She looked around nervously, probably thinking no one was watching. She walked up to the garage door, peering inside as if searching for violations. The audacity of it left me speechless. How dare she? Again. I didn't confront her this time. Instead, I let the cameras do their job. Once she left, I reviewed the footage frame by frame. It was crystal clear. Karen had trespassed onto my property without permission. For the second time. This wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was harassment, plain and simple. Armed with the video evidence, I called another HOA meeting. This time, I came prepared. Along with the footage, I brought screenshots of the association's bylaws, highlighting sections that explicitly stated inspections required prior written notice and homeowner consent. I also included testimonies from neighbors who'd experienced similar intrusions. By the time I finished presenting my case, the room was silent. Karen tried to defend herself, of course. I was only checking for compliance, she insisted, though her voice wavered. You can't accuse me of wrongdoing based on a few seconds of footage. But the board members didn't look convinced. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact with both of us. For the first time, Karen seemed unsure of herself. Her usual confidence faltered under the weight of undeniable evidence. Still, she wasn't ready to admit defeat. In a desperate attempt to save face, she accused me of setting her up, claiming I'd installed the cameras specifically to entrap her. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're targeting me because you don't agree with the HOA's mission. I took a deep breath, refusing to let her twist the narrative. This isn't about targeting anyone, I said firmly. It's about holding people accountable. You broke the rules, Karen, not just mine, but the HOA's own guidelines. And now everyone knows it. As the meeting adjourned, I could see the cracks forming in Karen's carefully constructed facade. She stormed out, muttering angrily to herself, while the rest of the board exchanged uneasy glances. Things were changing in Willow Creek, whether Karen liked it or not. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were taking a step toward real change. The fallout from the meeting hit Karen harder than anyone expected. The video footage of her sneaking around my driveway spread quickly, first among the HOA board members, then to the rest of the neighborhood. Someone leaked it to a local community Facebook group, and within hours, it was all anyone could talk about. Comments poured in, ranging from outrage to disbelief. "This is insane," one neighbor wrote. "Who does she think she is?" Another chimed in. "I always knew something was off with her." For someone like Karen, who thrived on control and perfection, this kind of public exposure was devastating. She tried to downplay it at first, insisting she'd been misunderstood and accusing me of exaggerating the situation for attention. But the evidence spoke for itself, and people weren't buying her excuses anymore. Even those who had once supported her began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with her increasingly erratic behavior. Things escalated when I filed a formal complaint against Karen, not just with the HOA, but also with the city council. I included not only the video footage, but also statements from neighbors detailing similar incidents of harassment. It was a bold move, and honestly, part of me wondered if I was pushing too far. What if this backfired? What if Karen retaliated even harder? She didn't disappoint. A few days later, I received a letter from her lawyer accusing me of defamation and emotional distress. Apparently, she believed suing me would scare me into silence. Instead, it only made me more determined. If Karen wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd meet her challenge head-on. With Sarah's help, I hired my own attorney to counter her claims. We argued that Karen's actions were well documented and that her lawsuit was nothing more than an attempt to silence criticism. The legal battle dragged on for months, turning what should have been a simple dispute into an exhausting war of attrition. Every court date, every email exchange, every phone call drained both my energy and my bank account. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. Was standing up to Karen really worth all this stress? But then I'd remember why I started this fight in the first place. Not just for myself, but for everyone who'd felt powerless under the HOA's grip. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to shift. The scandal surrounding Karen forced the HOA to take action. Patricia Langston, desperate to preserve the association's reputation, announced Karen's indefinite suspension pending further investigation. It wasn't the full accountability I'd hoped for, but it was a start. In her place, a younger board member named Tom stepped up as interim president. Unlike Patricia or Karen, Tom seemed genuinely interested in listening to residents' concerns. He held open forums where people could voice their frustrations without fear of judgment or retaliation. Slowly, the atmosphere in Willow Creek began to change. Neighbors who had once avoided each other started talking again, sharing stories, and laughing over coffee. For the first time in years, the annual block party actually felt fun instead of obligatory. Even Mark noticed the difference. "It's like the neighborhood woke up," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Still, the scars remained. Some families decided they'd had enough and moved away, seeking homes without HOAs. Others stayed, hopeful that things would continue improving. As for Karen, she disappeared from view altogether, retreating behind closed doors and avoiding public spaces. Rumor had it she was planning to sell her house and leave Willow Creek for good. Through it all, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed, not just in the neighborhood, but in me. Before this whole ordeal, I'd been content to stay quiet, to avoid conflict at all costs. But now I understood the importance of standing your ground, even when it's hard. Because sometimes the hardest fights are the ones worth winning. With Karen out of the picture, Willow Creek began to feel like a different place. The tension that had lingered in the air for so long started to lift, replaced by a sense of relief, and maybe even hope. But rebuilding trust wasn't going to happen overnight. Years of strict rules and Karen's overreach had left their mark on the community. Neighbors were wary, unsure if this newfound openness would last or if it was just a temporary reprieve. Tom, the interim HOA president, seemed determined to make lasting changes. He organized regular meetings where residents could voice their opinions without fear of judgment. At first, attendance was sparse. People were hesitant to speak up after years of being shut down or dismissed. But slowly, they began to open up. One evening, an older man named Greg stood up during a meeting and admitted he'd stopped hosting backyard barbecues because he was afraid the HOA would fine him for having too many cars parked on the street. "It sounds silly now," he said with a nervous laugh, "but I didn't want to cause trouble." His honesty broke the ice. Others followed suit, sharing their own frustrations. Unreasonable fines, invasive inspections, and the constant pressure to conform. Listening to them, I realized how much we'd all been carrying silently. For years, we'd tiptoed around the HOA's rules, sacrificing pieces of ourselves to fit into someone else's idea of perfection. Now, finally, we had a chance to reclaim our neighborhood, not as a collection of houses governed by rigid guidelines, but as a community of people who cared about each other. Sarah and I decided to take things a step further. We joined the revamped HOA committee, eager to help reshape Willow Creek into a place where people felt valued rather than policed. Together with Tom and a few other neighbors, we rewrote outdated policies, eliminating unnecessary restrictions and focusing on what truly mattered: safety, cleanliness, and respect for one another. We created a system for handling complaints more fairly, ensuring homeowners received proper notice before any inspections, and perhaps most importantly, we encouraged open communication between residents and the board. Not everyone was thrilled about the changes. Some longtime members of the HOA grumbled about losing control, while others worried that loosening the rules would lead to chaos. "If we don't enforce standards, the whole neighborhood will fall apart," One woman argued during a heated discussion. Her words echoed Karen's earlier arguments, but this time, they didn't hold as much weight. More people spoke up, defending the need for balance and compassion. It wasn't about throwing out all the rules. It was about making sure those rules served the community instead of controlling it. As the months passed, the transformation became undeniable. Lawns still looked neat, but families no longer panicked over every blade of grass out of place. Porches were decorated with colorful flowers, some of which might not have met the old approved list. But no one cared anymore. Even the annual holiday lights contest felt less competitive and more fun, with neighbors cheering each other on instead of comparing who had the fanciest display. Still, not everything healed perfectly. Some wounds ran too deep. A few families chose to move away, unable to forget the years of stress and conflict. Others stayed but kept their distance, reluctant to fully trust the HOA again. And then there were those who remained cautiously optimistic, willing to give the neighborhood another chance, if only to see where it might go. For me, the change was profound. Before this ordeal, I'd always thought of my home as just a house, a structure with walls and a roof. But now I understood it was so much more. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people inside it, the connections we built, and the battles we fought together. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But for the first time since moving here, it felt like ours. And that made all the difference. Looking back on everything that happened, I can't help but marvel at how much it changed me. And not just me, but the entire neighborhood. Before Karen's antics and the chaos that followed, I was someone who avoided conflict at all costs. If something bothered me, I'd brush it off or convince myself it wasn't worth the trouble. But standing up to her taught me something important. Sometimes staying silent isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it feels scary or overwhelming. This experience also showed me the power of community. When I first moved to Willow Creek, I thought the neighborhood's charm came from its manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. But now I know better. The real beauty of a place lies in the people, their kindness, their resilience, their willingness to stand together when things get tough. Without Sarah, Tom, and so many others stepping forward to support the cause, I wouldn't have been able to push back against Karen's overreach. Together, we proved that change is possible, even in the face of stubborn resistance. Of course, the journey wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the legal battles dragged on, when tempers flared during meetings, when old fears crept back in. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered why I started this fight in the first place. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about creating a space where everyone could feel safe and respected. And knowing that kept me going, even when the road got rocky. Now life in Willow Creek feels lighter. The HOA still exists, of course. It's part of the fabric of our neighborhood. But it's no longer the suffocating force it once was. Gone are the days of nitpicking inspections and unreasonable fines. Instead, there's a sense of balance and understanding. People smile more, wave hello as they pass by, and genuinely care about one another. Even small gestures, like sharing homemade cookies or helping carry groceries, feel meaningful again. There's still work to be done, of course. Some neighbors remain cautious, unsure whether the changes will stick or if the old ways might creep back in. Others worry about finding that delicate line between maintaining standards and letting people live freely. But these conversations are happening openly now, with mutual respect instead of fear driving them. That alone is progress. As for me, I've learned to embrace imperfection, not just in my home, but in life itself. My garage, it's still inspected occasionally, but now it's done politely, with plenty of notice and a friendly knock on the door. The rose bushes I planted last spring. They're thriving, even though their colors aren't officially approved. And those motion-activated cameras, they're still there, not just for security, but as a reminder of how far we've come. If there's one lesson I'll take away from all of this, It's that home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's the laughter shared over dinner, the quiet moments watching the sunset, and yes, even the fights fought to protect what matters most. Home is where you belong, where you're accepted, flaws and all. And thanks to the courage of so many in Willow Creek, I finally feel like I do. So here's to second chances, for neighborhoods, for communities, and for people like me who discovered strength they didn't know they had. Life may never be perfect, but maybe that's okay. After all, it's the little cracks and quirks that make a place truly special. And Willow Creek, well, it's starting to shine in its own imperfect, beautiful way.